I'm John Atack, and I'm delighted to welcome my very good friend, Joe Szimhart. Hi, Joe.
Hi, John. Good to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to see you. And today we're going to talk about something that, as my friend Yuval Lowell would say, is not trivial. We're going to talk about death and the way that authoritarian groups manipulate our uncertainty about death to get us, to be devoted to them and do what we're told. So do you want to kick that off, Joe?
Yeah, I mentioned to John, and I'll bring this up, my sister, Jeanette, who's 5 years younger than me, just passed away a couple of days ago. And, we've been dealing with that as a family. It's been on my mind. I wrote something on Facebook about it, kind of a eulogy to her. So I've been thinking quite a bit about this in relation to cults, and of course the book by Ernest Becker,
The Denial of
Death.
Death.
In fact, I had it out called The Denial of Death, which I did review years ago, and actually did a talk on it for ICSA, for the International Cultic Studies Association. It was that book and the follow-up book, research based on Becker's Denial of Death, called The Worm at the Core, which looks at how advertising, how religious groups, good and bad, and any number of other human social activities can flash death or some semblance of that into our consciousness, and immediately sales or interest in the next sentence or product will go up. So it's an easy way to manipulate individuals by using that, and it could be done in a positive sense, like you will live longer if you eat these vitamins. Again, it appeals to the fear of death or the denial of death.
Yeah.
And how we handle all that. And, even the cult I was in, Church Universal and Triumphant, was all about the ascension. If you do what we tell you to do, and you do it properly, and do all these chants and mantras and decrees, and follow the diet and wear the proper colors, and blah blah, it goes on endlessly, your chances for ascension are enormously increased, because you have been initiated into the most special group on earth. And rather than reincarnate hundreds of thousands of lifetimes, you can do this ascension now, just like Jesus did.
And just a matter of interest, where would this ascension take you? What sort of paradise, or where would you go?
My wife and I have been discussing this since my sister died, because you get into discussions.
Of course.
She lost her brother a similar way about 4 or 5 years ago, to cancer. So we came up with this concept that we just go elsewhere. So with a capital E, and we're leaving it at that. There is not a language game. You can play all kinds of language games, as to what heaven is, and what the beyond is, and what hell is, and purgatory, and you can play God in your mind with punishing other people that are bad, if you want to. But
specifically within Church Universal and Triumphant, where did you think you were going to go? What is taught in that group about where the ascension leads? The Mormons, you're going to be on.
Yeah. It's a little like Mormonism and Theosophy. Church Universal's theology, or cosmology, if you will, is based on hierarchy. So there's layers of ascension, which is you ascend into an ascended master. And in the ascended master realm, you can still have male, female, kind of like angelic beings, proto-angelic beings. As one evolves even further up Blavatsky's hierarchical scale of being, it's almost medieval. The split halves of the male female will meet their twin flame, their twin ray, in the ascended realm. And if they evolve enough, they can merge and become an aeon, meaning a permanent angelic force, forever married within the great marriage of what the Gnostics call the pleroma. So that's essentially a Gnostic, a neo-Gnostic cult is what Church Universal was, and it's based on this medieval and early Gnostic mythology. It borrows somewhat from Neoplatonism.
Yeah, I
There's
was
some
going to
of
say
that
it's
in
like
there.
Plato's
Yeah,
four-legged, four-armed beings having united themselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we end up in one big, harmonious, beautiful, forever waltzing realm of light. Yeah.
How tedious.
Yep. Who knows? Permanent consciousness that way might be the solution to everything. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying the use of the concept is a powerful way to manipulate people here in embodiment here on Earth. So by getting into the resolution of what happens when we die is the means to manipulate people to buy products, to buy into religions, to buy tombstones. I mean, it can be used for any number of things. Yeah, so I was kind of curious also about how you might view this from your Scientology experience. What does Scientology deal with death? I mean, what does it say? Because I just explained to you what Church Universal does with it.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side, the dark side, just to finish this,
Totally.
again, is reincarnation, which is something that Scientology believes in also. And so that if you miss your chance for ascension in this lifetime in this Church Universal and Triumphant group, or that kind of group, you can be condemned to 10,000 lifetimes of living hell on earth as we are living now before you get another chance to meet this special group to help you ascend in that lifetime. So that's the dark side of not getting it right.
And I came from involvement with Zen Buddhism, and essential to that, I had the good fortune to be allowed to question the abbot at Throstlehold Priory, who they now deny ever existed, because he left them and joined the Tibetans. So the first abbot was some other guy, but I was there, in the first year, and he was he's called Daiji Strathern, Daiji being his Japanese name and Strathern being his Scottish name, and he'd actually grown up as a Theravadin Buddhist in Scotland, and he was great. He really had a lot to say. And there was this question about, what is the nature of the self? What is the nature of the spirit, the soul, the person, the being? Ontologists will call the Thetan. And he said that there's a differentiation between the traditional Hindu view of Atman, the spirit, and a Buddhist view. And he said that if we considered the body to be a light bulb, then the self is the energy that flows through the light bulb. And that confused the hell out of me. I've got no idea what that means. I'm kind of going, are they wired in parallel or are they wired in serial? I don't know what's going on here. So in Scientology, we were given the much more Hindu sort of idea of a perpetual self, Atman, Thetan. But where in Hinduism, the idea is that you will recombine with Paramatman, the Great Spirit, and there are variations on that because Hinduism touches all bases. Then in Scientology, the dogma is, and it's only, I've only been able to find it in one place in a book called Creation of Human Ability, where in just one of the thousands of procedures of Scientology, the processes of Scientology, route to process number 47 is called separateness. And it says that Hubbard has discovered that we did not emerge from a single mass of theta or spiritual energy, that we are perpetually individual. And I think that's a very significant starting point. Most Scientologists don't know this because it's so obscure, this thing, or they may have read it and not really realize that this is a very essential piece.
But it almost goes back to Leibniz's theory of monads, and he had one where these corpuscles, as they called them back then, are eternal. They're little tiny bits of things that make up everything.
Yeah,
and they are just
is made of little beings.
Right.
In Leibniz's idea.
So Hubbard wasn't quite original in his
Hubbard wasn't quite original in anything.
Right.
From my determination.
He was originally Hubbard, though.
Well, I'm not sure about that, actually. I think he may have been a doppelganger, just copying himself. But, and there were theories about that too in Scientology when we left. The original founders bulletin, which said, I was driven out of the body in 1952 and now I'm coming back, which was great, good fun. Yeah. But when I came to Scientology, you come from the Indian tradition, Buddhism, Hinduism, where the idea is, reincarnation, you're on the wheel of suffering. It's not getting any better. It's awful. And life is about suffering, according to the Buddha.
Right.
To live is to suffer.
Or as a good poet friend of mine said, the Buddha's main statement was, it hurts.
Yes, exactly. Ouch. And one can see that perspective. One can understand that there will be a degree of suffering in any life. Let's just sidetrack into the famous Chinese illustration of the barrel of vinegar with Lao Tzu, Confucius, Zhongfutsu, and the Buddha all standing by the barrel and all having tasted the vinegar. And Zhongfutsu, Confucius is going, "Ugh!" and the Buddha is serene, and Lao Tzu is smiling because he's enjoyed the vinegar. So these are the three great faiths of the Chinese. But what I was taught, therefore, in Buddhism and in talking to my Hindu friends at the time, was the fear of the eternal return. Reincarnation was, oh no, not again. So everything was designed to help you escape for moksha, liberation, enlightenment, nirvana, nibbana. And so that's the aim. Then you come to Scientology, and they're these kind of, they're going, oh no, it's a good thing that you're going to reincarnate. You're going to be born again. I'll be able to do it in my next lifetime. So that's because for me, the most terrifying thought in the world, to the point of getting palpitations once when thinking about it, was the eternal return. That you're living forever. So, there are two terrifying concepts for human.
That was, by the way, that was Nietzsche's most terrifying insight, was the eternal return, that infinitely he, as he was now, was going to come back at some point. It might not be for 10 billion aeons or whatever, but he would be condemned to eternally do what he's doing now, precisely what he's doing now.
And spending 15 years in a madhouse with a huge walrus mustache, dying of syphilis. This is the man who said, and my God, I'm tired of this expression because most people don't trace it to him, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is in fact not true. Cutting your leg off will not make you stronger.
Right.
And as he found, catching syphilis, it wasn't very useful. But so I had that conflict that I didn't, I'd come from a group that wanted to end by merging into Buddha mind or nirvana. Instead, I'm being offered something where I'll be, you look back at it and it's like you'll be Spider-Man or something like that. That's what they're offering. It's just crazy. Yeah. And so you drop the body, that's dying. I've spoken with many people who, after leaving Scientology, finally mourned the loss of a loved one, and it hit them very hard that they'd been so callous and inconsiderate and just dismissed it. It's rather like the interview that George Harrison gave after they were told that Brian Epstein had died, and they'd just been with the so-called Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi. And Harrison basically is just brushing it aside and saying, no, death's not the end of anything. And I don't think the Epstein family were particularly pleased by that response.
Right. It's kind of facile hippie talk at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Not taking on board the real emotions. So with Scientology, the idea is that you're, and there isn't anywhere you're going other than that you're going to be spending the next 1,000 million years clearing everybody around you, so they'll be in exactly the same state that you're in.
Oh, it's a great business model. It never ends.
Yeah, that's true. But Hubbard went off to another sector of the galaxy, we're told, in an issue that, in fact, David Miscavige would later cancel. So we don't know where he's gone.
Maybe he met Douglas Adams there in a fictional state.
Yeah, and poor Douglas Adams, a genius of his caliber, having to spend time But as he said, Eddie's in the space-time continuum, and the answer to that is, well, we better let him out, or time is an illusion and lunchtime doubly so. They're great.
But it's important to take a towel with you.
Mm.
Yes.
And of course, traveling in hyperspace is like being drunk, which doesn't sound too bad. Well,
No.
it is if you're the glass of water. Much better religious teachings than Scientology ever had, frankly.
Yeah. What's interesting, maybe I could change this a bit, this fear of death, or the denial of death, we get attracted to kinds of things, is how I brought this about. And it was interesting with my sister, and we grew up Catholic, and in the middle of this valiant effort of hers to go through chemo and all of that, she did something she didn't do before. There's locally here, there's a place dedicated to Padre Pio, and you know who I'm talking about, the Catholic saint.
No, tell me about Pio.
I'll link you the website. But Pio was known for his stigmata. His hands
had the marks.
They were caked with like blood crusts and whatever. And there's a big controversy over whether that was real or psychosomatic or miraculous, whatever. But the Padre Pio devotees of his cult, believe he's a full saint, and he was sainted by one of the later popes recently. I think he died in 1968, I believe. So he's recent. He's not an older, but he's very popular, among believers of that sort. And I know my sister went to the center here, which is not recognized by the church. It's a big, people have gone since about 20 years, 25 years to worship. Some family put the center up, and it's well endowed. Because they believe that Pio laid his hands on their 2-year-old that had a congenital kidney defect, and when they came back from Italy to the United States, she recovered from this congenital, and that to them was a miracle. And the story that they set up this big shrine, and it's quite popular. I personally visited it. It's only about 10 miles from my home here, and family. So my sister did too, and she lit a candle, hoping for the miracle of cure. Of course, didn't occur. By the way, I'm bringing this up, interestingly enough, because I had to look up the website because of someone else I was talking to, a mutual friend of ours, through email about this. And I noticed as I logged on to the Padre Pio website, today is his birthday, Pio's birthday.
Birthday,
so
we
a
hope
little
your
bit
hands
of.
have healed by now,
But anyway, this brings up a whole other territory. Like there's been ancient cultures that have had trees that have healing powers that they would do pilgrimages to. Yeah. And of course, we have lords. There's a place in Rancho de Chimayo near Santa Fe, New Mexico, that I've been to many times, that has sacred dirt in the ground in the chapel that people rub onto their crippled bodies or whatever, and that people have claimed to have been healed by this over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this kind of activity goes on in human affairs, and like I said, it might have some benefit to give people some hope, but it can also be used as a powerful attraction into closed systems of manipulation.
And hope can very quickly turn into despair and desperation, which is why the suicide rate in Scientology, by my estimation, is about 10 times higher than that around. Because when you've been led on, you can, you climb high and fall, to a great depth. So then, and of course it goes, I've just finished the amazing David Graeber, David Wengrow book, The Dawn of Everything, which reconstructs archaeology and the prehistory, the history of prehistory, and says actually we've misunderstood so much over the years. And I think it's a fantastic book, and it will change. It should, because the evidence is there now, and it's just that anthropologists and archaeologists are still working within the tramlines that were laid down, decades ago. And their point is basically, in short, that this is not the end of history, that patrician capitalism is not the inevitable outcome of society, that, that it somehow evolved, and I think it's a mistake to take the term evolution and use it too broadly.
I do too.
Yeah, and that they sort of say, no, there have been many different forms of society. So, some of which I knew about. I knew that in Ukraine, indeed, there'd been what appeared to be an egalitarian society. In what is now Pakistan, the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, that existed for 700 years without warfare. So they look at those many things.
I was, go ahead.
What fascinates me in reading Mircea Eliade or Joseph Campbell and lots of it, and lots of history of religion, is that death is a central point for every human society, how we treat death. Charles Tart in Altered States talked about a society that mourn when you were born and rejoice when you die, because this is considered to be the nasty bit in between. I quite like being alive, I must say. And I take Jung-Soo's view, which is I've got no idea where I was before I was born, despite having had lots of auditing in my past life.
Well, according to cognitive science, according to cognitive science theory, I've been rereading an essay I wrote a long time ago that someone read and emailed me. They were in a Polish called Agni Hotra, multi-generationally, and he read this essay I did on cognition and cults, and he just was thanking me profusely, because it really touched him as to what he's trying to figure out right now. And I thought, well, this is just what I do, because I'm trying to figure it out for myself.
Exactly, yeah. But it is so marvelous, isn't it?
But in that essay, I bring up what you're bringing up, is that there isn't really no human evolution in the sense of what we know about our recent history, and I mean back 100,000 years. And if you take an example of the British, the lovely British Captain Cook coming into Aboriginal Australia, which was a culture that has existed there about 40,000 years, is what they're guessing, and maybe longer, we don't know. But they've stayed hunter-gatherer farmer type of culture there and developed their own governance, their own mythologies, their own languages. There were over hundreds of languages already, dialects within the Aboriginal cultures down there. So in come the Brits with their diseases and their ideas and their new technologies and all that, and take over the existing farming territory, which has been in harmonious productivity for centuries because of the way Aboriginals farmed. And they did their own farming techniques and ruined the land within 2 generations, ruining the science of the Aboriginal.
Yes. Everything was in balance, even though we might criticize some of the rituals of the Aborigine people at that time. At least they weren't genocidal like the British were.
Not like that, no. They weren't perfect, obviously. But what's interesting to me is that you take that Aboriginal and if you think that there's some kind of human evolution, that somehow the Brits were more evolved than the Aboriginal, within 1 generation, if an Aboriginal was adapted to British language, British culture, raised in it, they could learn the sciences just as easily as any Brit could, meaning that the brain, there was no incredible evolution of human consciousness and brain, only exposure to new technology. That's basically it, is how we've, quote, evolved technologically, but not who we are. We have remained the same. So this new age concept that we're going into a new paradigm, that there's going to be new indigo children, a new evolution of the human consciousness, or a church universal evolution into ascended masters or whatever, is total bullshit. When it comes to cognitive science, we haven't changed a whole hell of a lot as to our species in the last 60,000, 100,000 years.
Yeah, the awning of the cage of aquariums.
Yes.
And it is important to separate this thing out, that when we talk about evolution, we're talking about physiological processes, changes that happen as adaptations to get us so we can survive better, and exaptations, which Stephen Jay Gould put into, and it's so important to say accidents that turn out to be serendipitous, they turn out to be positive. But when we start trying to take the model of the change of species over time and say, well, there's such a thing as social evolution, then, as you said, the first point to make is that the original Homo sapiens sapiens, about perhaps 200,000 years ago, maybe further back now, it was 40,000 when I was a kid. We've gone past 200,000 now with actual finds, but nothing has changed or evolved, particularly in the human brain in that time.
The other way
social evolution is a misnomer. When you're dealing with societies, there are many possibilities that are being tried out. And in the same way with physiological evolution, sometimes you'll be in the environment where that's the right way to be. So, sometimes being a Trump supporter, you might be in the right environment. If you're in QAnon, and you're getting free pizza or whatever it is, it might suit you. But this idea of progress and perfection and achieving something, we aren't there. Our society is not a perfect ascended society.
In fact, if you use the Australian model, there was nothing to prevent a Brit, a pirate that had landed there, to adapt and become Aboriginal. In other words, they could have, quote, socially evolved and learn that language and learn those techniques. And so I'm not equivocating, but there's a lot of, in other words, this goes both ways. You don't have to drag the Aboriginal into the higher consciousness of the Brit in order to become more fully human. You can also drag the Brit into the full consciousness of the Aboriginal to become fully human. And who's to say which is better? That this is the old question. And it isn't a matter of better. It's just that we are capable of doing both because that's who we are.
Yeah. And Graeber and Wengrow point out that in every case that they've seen of Europeans being adopted into First Peoples, Native American peoples, they all preferred that society to the European society.
I read a book about that recently, and there's evidence quite a bit in Pennsylvania area where native tribes, if their populations were depleted, it was okay to kidnap children from other tribes and bring them in. And there were some cases where women and children were kidnapped into the tribe. It was part of their culture. And the children were raised in it. And of course, the colonists wanted to get these kids back. And sometimes they did. They went in and got them back through fighting or bartering or whatever they did. Well, more often than not, the kid that had been raised for years and conscious now, like a 10-year-old kid, did not want to stay in the colonial culture. They ran back. Some of them ran back to the native culture. So, that's just a case in point to what you're saying, is that the way of life, even though it may not have been technologically advanced or with the kind of medicines that extend life, was a lot more harmonious and pleasing to the human being than what the colonists were presenting to the Indians.
I mean, there's a suggestion that the Enlightenment, and Graeber and Wengrow go deeply into this, that the thoughts expressed by Rousseau, for example, come from Turtle Island, which is North America, and can be traced to a Frenchman called La Hontan, who was a baron who brought these ideas over and into various peoples in what is now Canada and the United States, and particularly a man called Kandiaronk. And when they first met Europeans, they were disgusted. They were disgusted at how dirty Europeans were. They were disgusted at the bickering and fighting that went on, where certain tribal peoples there, they could be extraordinarily cruel to strangers, to captives. They really could. Let's not have a romantic with anyone. But they were very kind to their own people. And they didn't understand why the Europeans were so brutal towards their own people. So, but in each case, returning to our subject, the thing that fascinated me in it's probably Campbell, 20 years ago when I was reading Campbell, and sort of again and again, what are the rituals of death? This idea that occurred in, his great quest from the 40s onwards was to say, is there a collective unconscious from which all of these stories are coming, as Jung says, or has there been transmission? Now, he eventually favored the idea of transmission, that the Sumerian Babylonian culture had then spread through India, China. He doesn't seem to have been aware of the effect of the Cambodian culture on
Yeah,
China.
what these cognitive scientists say, it's not so much transmission, it's the ability of humans to imitate. And that's what transmits. So we tell stories, we imitate the stories, we you know, in variation, but we can imitate clothing, you know, cultural clothing down the ages and change it. And then we imitate the new style in order to become more cohesive. So we have this ability to imitate.
You have the opposition to your neighbors, where you do the opposite to what your neighbors do.
Right.
Another drive.
Right.
But the culture of, you know, mass murder on the death of the pharaoh, or, you know, the king, that was rampant, and the killing of either horses or oxen, depending which culture it was. But that when a pharaoh or leader died, they would take with them their whole retinue, believing that they would travel into the afterlife with them. So, you know, we have the Egyptian Book of the Dead as a memory of that. And that so much seems to be, you know, we know of Neanderthal burials. We know that Neanderthals too had rituals that surrounded death. The idea of grave goods, things you'll be able to take with you. And the way that these ideas appear to have, and I'm going to use the word evolved, to have changed over so that we start out with the origin myth is usually you have Father Sky, who's been created by Mother Earth, and they then mate and they have, you know, however many children. Of course, Yahweh, Jehovah, the Christian, Jewish, Islamic God called Allah, but it's the same God. He is one of, I think, 72 children of the Sumerian Babylonian mother goddess. And we occasionally encounter his brother, Baal Marduk, the war god in the Old Testament, you know, the golden calf and what have you. But we're not going to have, you know, we now have the Babylonian stories, so we know how these stories changed. But so much of what we think of as religion, and therefore of the way that we behave to all around us, is caught up in our notion of death.
You know, I know some people that read this like every few years just to get back to this essential awareness, who Becker just was so good at, you know, at putting it down. And just to finish this with Becker, his final statement in this book, I've always liked. He says that we can conclude that a project as grand as the scientific mythical construction of victory over human limitation is not something that can be programmed by science. Even more, it comes from the vital energies of masses of men sweating within the nightmare of creation. I like that, the nightmare of creation. And it is not even in man's hands to program. Again, Hubbard trying to program all this. Yeah. Who knows from what form the forward momentum of life will take in the time ahead, or what use it will make of our anguished searching. The most that any one of us can seem to do is to fashion something, an object or ourselves, and drop it into the confusion and make an offering of it, so to speak, to the life force. And that's how he ends his book.
I mean, I take the personal view, and it's not original to me, that we're all threads in tapestry. And if we see ourselves as that, which is a more Eastern than Western view, then life is somewhat less miserable than the dread obsession. And let me point to just one thing to finish off. A couple of months ago, I read Michel de Montaigne's essay on death. And it's a wonderful piece, because he talks, this is a contemporary, older contemporary of Shakespeare. Shakespeare, in fact, quoted him, a courtier in the French court at that time in the early 16th century, and a very wise man. And he says, you know, throughout my youth, I was terrified of dying. It obsessed me. Now I'm an old man, I couldn't care less, you know. And I must say that, having, you know, I'm nearly 67 now, that it really doesn't bother me at all. And as Dennis Potter, the great English playwright, said, you know, his concern, and he was interviewed during the last days of his life knowing he was going to die. And he said the only thing that distressed him was how upset the people who loved him would be when he went. But and I have the good fortune to be in that state myself. My mother, who lived to be 94, and she was a Sunday school teacher as a young woman, and she joined Scientology to see if it was going to be dangerous to me. I didn't recruit her, and she was in for 8 years. And after that, and thinking it through, she said, when I die, I don't want to go to heaven. I don't want to reincarnate. I am happy with my life. It is complete. And that was a very reassuring, and she reiterated that. And I think I have pretty much the same point of view.
Wonderful. So, well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. Let's leave on
with your mother's tone. Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate the talk, and take care. We'll do this again soon, maybe in a month.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.